Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Unfounded Podcast. My name is Christopher Turner, and I am your host. Just checking in with you guys, seeing how you're doing, creeping up to Halloween time. Very exciting. I'm very excited for the end of this month because it has been a doozy for me. If you've been following along with the podcast, and I think you probably understand. But I want to talk to you guys a little bit. Before we get into it, I do have a couple announcements. So first off, I want to thank you guys for all of your support. I've been getting a couple of different people have reached out to me this last week, supporters of the pod that have been developing their own ideas as well, that have been going inside of themselves and figuring out what their truth is and then making it manifest in the world. And that is incredibly, incredibly energizing for me. Thank you for sharing your stories with me, if you're one of those people. And if you aren't, I hope that you do find a way to manifest whatever your truth is, whatever your individuality is, on the physical plane, right? That is a big part of this, the purpose of this. I think that's how we make this world a better place. Alrighty, so big thanks to those individuals that have reached out. Thank you for your support, to all of you for your support. I also want to keep you updated on how this podcast is growing. And we have grown quite a bit over the last couple weeks, something like 6 times growth over the last couple weeks. And that, again, is very energizing because this has been a very long road. This has been a very long process. I've been working in podcasts in general for about 2 years now, and this is the first time that I've really seen any kind of substantial growth from that. So thank you very much for sharing this with people that you care about, and please continue to do that. If you're looking for a method to do that, or if you want to just kind of engage with me and what I'm going through or what I'm thinking about when you're done with the podcast, please consider checking out the Facebook page. That Facebook page is facebook.com/theunfoundedpodcast. Also Instagram, I'm pretty active on, instagram.com/theunfoundedpod. I have a YouTube channel as well that I'm starting to develop, and I'm going to get video to this as well so that we can leverage that medium to get it to more people, but I still need to do a little bit of the technical aspects. I need to work out some of the technical aspects before I start doing that as well. So YouTube will be up soon. Also, I this week started to dictate all of these podcasts, right? So you're going to notice, especially if you go on my main web page, which is the-unfounded-podcast at /simplecast.com. If you go on that webpage, you'll see there's a closed caption mark next to, I think, the last 6 or 7 episodes. I now have captions for all of these episodes with timestamps, and I'm working on getting the entire library updated with that as well. So if you know anybody that maybe can't engage with the podcast medium or doesn't like to engage with the podcast medium, prefers to read it, that's another way that they can take part in the content, okay? So that is going to be available for you. I'm going to continue to working on that. And then also, a very long-term goal of mine is I want to try to consolidate all of this into a book. As I've been doing that dictation, and just heads up, the dictation isn't 100% perfect. There's going to be some errors. I speak very quickly, obviously, in this podcast, and also I have music in the background, which makes it a little harder for the dictation software to pick up what I'm saying. But it's about 90% accurate or so you can get the gist of it. But if you know anybody that's maybe deaf or has a hard time engaging with the podcast medium, that's another way that they can engage with the material. My long-term goal, as I was saying, is to try to consolidate all of this into a series of books. I want to try to get it in front of as many people as possible, right? And I think that the best way to do that is to try to leverage different mediums. So I'm going to start writing, or actually going back, dictating all of these episodes, and then trying to organize and consolidate them into a series of volumes. Because as I started to do that, I realized that there's a lot of content here. Just so you know, in one episode of about 60 minutes, that's about 8,000 to 9,000 words worth of talking that goes on here, right? And I have this is the 61st episode. So if you do some real quick math, you'll quickly find that that's about like a couple dictionaries worth of content, right? So initially my thought was, hey, I should write a book, and then I was like, maybe I need a couple volumes. If you get what I'm saying. So there's a lot of needless talk that I need to eliminate that wouldn't be good in a book form anyway, right? So anyway, also last but certainly not least, I am trying, this does cost money to do this, right? And I have, as you've recently heard, we'll get into that here at the very beginning, but I am currently unemployed again. So it's very hard for me to maintain this podcast and the small overhead that does exist by myself. So I have created a Patreon page. If you do enjoy this content and you want to support me in some way monetarily, that is going to be available for you as well. That Patreon page is at patreon.com/theunfoundedpod. I truly appreciate your support. Please do not feel like I'm asking you to get everybody to give money. If you feel comfortable and you want to support my work, please do. If you don't, please continue to enjoy the podcast. I don't expect everybody to do this, okay? But I do. My main goal on that page, the first goal is for me to be able to pay for that overhead through community support, okay? So I appreciate your support up until now. If you can't give in that way, please just continue to enjoy the pod. Spread your message, spread your individuality. That's the most important thing to me, okay? All right. That's a lot that's 5 minutes worth of talking that I really don't usually like to go through, but I usually have a quote or something pulled up and start with that, but actually I'm going to do something a little different this morning, and this is a Sunday morning here in Vegas. It's getting a little cooler, which is very nice. But what I want to do is actually talk about a couple... I was having a conversation with my friends the other night. Same friends that I do dinner with often. And like I said, this is a childhood friend that I grew up with. From what I would consider, not in a romantic sense, but like a soulmate type of individual, somebody I'm very deeply connected with, right? And every time I sit down and talk with him, the conversation goes to an incredibly deep level. And one of the things that happened when I was talking with him the other night, kind of explaining what happened with the situation I was going over in the last episode, is I think I was able to kind of kernelize an idea I've been chewing on for a very long time throughout these episodes. And heads up to all of you, this is going to be a very spiritual episode. If that's not your thing, you can tune out now. I hope you don't. I hope you listen, right? But I do want to give you a disclaimer that I'm going to be talking about basically all of the religions in this, right? And what my personal view is of what everything is, what this is, what life is, what the soul is, what religion's place in that is. I'm going to try to enunciate that for you as best I can. I think one of the issues to doing that is that, at least in the secular world, as the world that we've all grown up in, it's a world based on proof, right? On external proof. That people like to have tangible things to hold on to say like, see, look, this is real. And it kind of like a security blanket, right? And so when you try to explain spirituality or religion to somebody that's in that secular worldview, as I have been myself before, right? I understand that because I embodied it for a good decade. You'll quickly come to a point where the person's looking for a tangible external proof that isn't possible. It's like a fundamental, it's like a definition problem. You can't give the person what they're looking for because the entire purpose of religion is to get you to believe in yourself and in truth. And the process of belief, the process of faith, by definition, is... Let's define it. Let's define it real quick. I got a couple definitions already pulled up for you guys today, but complete trust or confidence in someone or something, strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. Exactly right there. So it's something like an internal knowing that you follow, and that by definition it necessitates that you don't look to the external world for proof. Now, I believe there's a couple of qualities, human experiences, you can even describe them as human emotions, that can act as a sort of proof, as a bridge between the secular and religious worlds. Those two things being empathy and nostalgia. Now, at first you're probably like, huh? But I'll get there, okay? It's going to take a little bit in this episode because it's a pretty complex idea, I think. I believe that all of the religions, as I've said before, all of the religions in the world, I believe that all of them are right in a certain sense. That one of the problems we've had throughout history is everybody kind of looking to the religion externally, like people look to the secular world for proof in a way, and then leveraging that proof to kind of disprove other religions. which has created a very combative, violent, kind of evil product. And so, especially when the secular worldview views religion and its role in history, it's very hard to disentangle that, right? At least the Western religions. I don't know if I can speak for the Eastern religions, but the Eastern religions in some way, like let's say Buddhism, like feudal Japan was a very violent place, right? Samurai culture, as we went over before, was a very violent way of living. Now, it was based in certain virtues, but a lot of people would argue that Buddhism is about nonviolence and things like that. Well, I agree with you, but also it can produce the same thing that Christianity and the Western religions have produced. The problem isn't the religions, the problem is the way people apply them. Anyway, I'm getting on a tangent. I think they're all right in a certain aspect. And I want to try to explain to you how what I view life being, what I view the purpose of the soul being, and how it connects to these different religions as I've viewed it. And then I'm going to try to also give you a little bit of anecdotal evidence. Now, I think that's the best way that you can try to provide proof to somebody, is through your own experience. And I think that empathy and nostalgia are two leverage points through which I can't give you the exact same experience, but I can offer something to look at, a mechanism through which you can try to recognize your own anecdotal truth, if that makes sense. And, well, let's just get into it. I believe that everything in life is connected. That you and me are the same thing as a rock or a tree. I think this is a very Eastern philosophy. That the universe is one thing. That in some ways what we have is a perspective problem. Excuse me. That perspective problem creates this... Individual perspective creates this fundamental problem where you can't view the whole because you're within it. It's kind of like the fish in the water, trying to explain water to a fish, right? Very difficult because being in something your entire life and never having an external perspective of it, how do you describe or give proof of something that you're within? Does that make sense? That you can't view externally. I think it's the same fundamental problem that we have with life itself. Many would ask, what's the purpose of all of this? Secularism, I think, is continually trying to find a purpose short of the religious purpose that has been presented throughout history. And what I believe the purpose of life is something like what the religions say. It's something like the development of the soul. How does that process work? Well, like I said, I think everything's connected. We are all the same thing fundamentally. I believe that soul is life. I believe that anything that is living has a soul of sorts. Now, that doesn't mean it's conscious in the way that we think of consciousness. We think of consciousness as this sort of logical way of viewing the world, right? This ability to view oneself outside of oneself. The recognition of the self, right? Now, but at the same time, I believe that there's different levels to the soul, if that makes sense. And that the way the soul develops is something like going through the different perspectives present within the universe, within the world. I think this is something that I believe exists in a lot of the Eastern religions, like Hinduism. And there's this karmic aspect within Hinduism as well, that what you do in this life determines what you do in the next. I believe that there are multiple lives, not only multiple lives, but kind of an endless series of lives. There's a purpose behind it, and it is so that your soul develops, moves on to the next level. Now, for me, what that means is that the most primitive version of the soul is the most primitive version of life. It'd be something like the smallest bacteria, right? A virus. Something like that. And that the soul starts in this very, very archaic form. It's a very simple form. And that there's lessons that each of these embodiments produce. There's hurdles that each of these specific perspectives produce. And that if you are successful in that perspective at overcoming the hurdle, that individual thing that is you, even down at the most fundamental level, the most simple level, then you move on to the next slightly more complicated form of life. And that this process repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. So that what you are and have been is something like everything. You've been an ant. You've been a deer. You've been a tree. You've been a flower. You've been anything that is living. Enter empathy. Let me define empathy for you. I think empathy is a way that you can recognize that this is true. The Google definition of empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. I want to try to find the Wikipedia one. Let's go to the Wikipedia one as well, because I think that's an important, a little deeper description. Empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within their frame of reference. Person is where we go wrong with empathy. I think we misdefine it. That is the capacity to place oneself in another's position. That's more accurate. Definitions of empathy encompass a broad range of emotional states. Types of empathy include cognitive empathy. See how we segmented it all? Try to make it different things. Emotional or affective empathy and somatic empathy. The English word empathy is derived from the ancient Greek word empatheia, meaning physical affection or passion. This in turn comes from at, or pathos, passion or suffering. The term was adopted by Hermann Lotz and Robert Vischer to create the German word feeling into. I can't pronounce it. I'm not very good at German, guys. Sorry. This was described for the first time in English by the British critic and author Vernon Lee, who explained the word sympathy with feeling is exercised only when our feelings enter and are absorbed into the form we perceive. Is exercised only when our feelings enter and are absorbed into the form we perceive. As I said, I think they go wrong in the definition up here. And the way we most of us define empathy. Empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing. That's the most common form of empathy, but not the only form. Why is there so much activism around kind of, what's it called? I'm sorry, I'm having a brain fart here. The way that we treat animals, right? The factory farming. Why are there so many people that believe that there's that harming animals in any way, right, is deeply immoral? Why do we think that? It seems on the surface that you could probably say, well, because cruelty in any form, right? Like, well, harm in any form is wrong. I don't think that's true. We can get into that at a later point. I don't think that's true necessarily. That cruelty, yes. Harm, no. Harm is akin to suffering. Suffering is a necessity. So, what I believe empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another being is experiencing, not person. And that the reason you can feel or understand another being's perspective, the reason why if you go and crush an ant, you feel a little bad when you do it, or you should, is because you've been an ant before. It's a form of memory, people. Every other time you experience empathy, if you experience empathy for another person, it's because you've experienced something similar to that other person, right? If you watch some person get bullied, it will bring you back to whenever you've been picked on. You'll feel the same emotions. That's how you feel the same emotions. It's through that memory. Isn't that odd? So that what I'm arguing for is empathy is a form of memory. It's a form of past life memory that we have done a very bad job of identifying. And that the reason that you can feel the pain of other animals, some people would say it's just because they imitate human-like behavior. No, they don't. Why do you feel bad about killing a bug? You could say you don't, but at some fundamental level, ending anything makes you feel bad. I believe it's a form of memory. It's a form of you being able to embody the perspective of the ant or the beetle or the flower or the tree. You see people fighting for all of these things to be saved in the world. Why do you think that happens? Those are people with strong connections to those memories, I believe. The memory of being a tree, or the memory of being an ant, or the memory of being a cow. That what the human being is at a fundamental level is something like a culmination of all of the spiritual experience of everything that's lived before it. That everything that comes before it. Every other life form that's less complex than the human being. And that the reason there's an idea in Genesis, in Christianity, of God giving dominion over the beasts of the world to human beings is because of the human being's capacity for empathy. That is a specific, from what I can tell, that is something like very specific to human beings, or at least to the most complex forms of life. I think you could probably argue, or maybe try to prove, that a dog or a dolphin or something like that has a form of empathy, that they can feel or conceptualize what others feel in some way and act accordingly. But that those also can be proven to be very complex forms of life that have something like personality, that have the ability to view the self even if they can't enunciate it, right? And that the reason that human beings were given dominion over the beasts, quotation marks, of the world is because they have been the beasts of the world prior. That all of the beasts of the world came before the human being. That lines up very nicely with evolution, right? All of these things fit together in a beautiful way. I want to move on to nostalgia, because I think this is another way that you can, and what I hope you do is you try to think about that feeling whenever you experience it next time. And for me, like, as soon as I said this and we were talking about this, all three of us, it was me, my friend, and his girlfriend, all three of us just smiled and paused like, whoa, that makes sense. Almost like you could remember it, right? I want to move on to nostalgia, because I believe that the human being is the most complex form of life as we know it. And that once you get through the other steps of soul development, through every other existence, every other perspective, and you culminating in the human being, the most complex form of it, culminating in that perspective, what often happens is you repeat that perspective over and over and over and over and over and over again, because it's exceedingly complex and exceedingly difficult to solve. It's why there's an idea of enlightenment in the Eastern religions. It's why there's an idea of the way or the path in the Western religions. Because that is the answer to the human being problem. That is the answer to the culmination of soul development, I believe, to moving on to whatever the next level is, that we can never perceive from this plane, but that I truly believe there is another level to this. I believe there's beings that already embody that level, like I said, that you can flip on the switch to, that you can have a conversation to, that are just waiting for you to level up. And they'll tell you how to, but you have to tune into it. You have to believe. It's based in faith, not in external proof. The fundamental problem we have in the modern day. One of the ways you can recognize that you've done this before, and sure, the possibility exists that maybe this is your first time on this plane, in this human existence, in this embodiment. Maybe it is. So maybe you're not going to resound with this as much. Or maybe this will resound quite a lot. I think history in an odd way. And your attraction to history is one of the ways that you can demonstrate whether you've done this a lot or not. Why, you ask? Because of nostalgia. Nostalgia is, this is a Google definition, a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. I was overcome with acute nostalgia for my days in college. So by this definition, let's go back to the Wikipedia one as well. Nostalgia is a sentimentality for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. The word nostalgia is a learned formation of a Greek compound consisting of nostos, meaning homecoming, and a Homeric word, agos, meaning pain or ache. So home ache, home pain, and was coined by a 17th century medical student to describe the anxieties displayed by Swiss mercenaries fighting away from home. Described as a medical condition, a form of melancholy in the early modern period, it became an important trope in Romanticism. So nostalgia is a very new concept. Nostalgia is associated with yearning for the past, its personalities, possibilities, and events, especially the good old days or a warm childhood. Now I want to stop there. By this definition, nostalgia is associated with places you have been. The funny thing that I think I've identified and I've experienced myself over and over again is because as a child, I was extremely attracted to history. Specifically certain time periods, very specific certain time periods. I remember feeling a form of nostalgia. It's the best way to describe it. I remember feeling nostalgic for certain periods in time, very, very deeply attracted to them. You can see many people, many historians do this. They usually tend to focus on one or certain aspects of history, not the whole broad swath of it. Now, nostalgia, as this definition, as we define it, is a place that you've been before. The only other time you feel nostalgic for something in your life is when you've been there and done that. You want to go back. So why in the hell do you feel nostalgic about time periods before you existed in this physical form? How does that work? It's a form of memory. Nostalgia is a form of past life memory when viewed in the proper context. It's a way you can recognize when you've lived before as a human being. And I believe that there's certain aspects of actually reading into your nostalgic feeling and trying to analyze the places that you attract you to, the times in history you're attracted to, that unlocks in a certain way what your hurdles are in this existence, in this specific plane. It's a lot to chew on, huh? Give me 1 second, I'm going to take a drink of my coffee. Now, this breaks away from the more traditional Christian views. But like I said, I don't believe anybody has it all right. The Eastern religions don't, the Western religions don't. Paganism has a place in this as well. There's certain aspects of the pagan religions that are very accurate, that you can experience yourself. There's a truth in them as well. You can see how Christianity, and this is one of the criticisms I have of it, historically, has tried to define itself as the only way to view things, just like secularism tried to do. But that each of these religions throughout the world developed independently of each other. And yet, so they are, in some ways, a representation of the individuality of those groups. Right? And so they are true. Each of them. Just like your individuality is true, you speaking your being into existence is the only form of real truth. Objective truth doesn't exist. Nostalgia and empathy. Those are forms of memory. Forms of memory we have not yet identified as such. But I believe They're points of focus through which you can get that anecdotal evidence that you're seeking. I can't give you what time periods you've lived in before. I can't tell you how you felt about those things. I can't tell you about why you're more attracted or empathize more with, let's say, cows or trees. You have to define that. But I'm telling you, if you try to view that as that, if you try to view empathy and nostalgia as form of memory, it's like a light switch flipping on. You're never going to remember the exact things you did in those prior lives, those past existences. You're never going to remember it because you don't have the wiring to remember it. Time doesn't exist. You have the wiring right now to remember this plane. And you do up until you die and transition to the next. How do you go on remembering that you've done it before? You empathize. You feel nostalgic. It's the spiritual form of memory. It's the timeless form of memory. Nietzsche got it right. The human being is evolving, but it doesn't evolve over one man's lifetime. It evolves over millennia, just like everything else in nature. And then nature itself has a way of distilling truth, so that the things that don't serve nature die off. I would argue that institutionalized religion, secularism itself, which has become a form of religion in its place after the death of God, both are dying. What that is doing is actually producing a higher form of human being. A human being that recognizes finally what it truly is and views life and existence in its true form, and associates its true purpose to it, which is for the soul to develop, for you to move on to another plane of existence. If you want to talk about in terms of Christianity, for you to become an angel yourself, not God, something like an angel. For the Eastern religions, for you to become something like a Buddha. I don't know what the form would be in Hinduism, but I'm sure there is a representation of that. That perfect manifestation of the human being in this body. You have all the capacity to be that right now, which is why Buddha laughs at you. Why life is a comedy. Because you're all of it. You are all of it. Yet we sit here looking externally to other people looking for the same thing, trying to comfort each other. Oh, you haven't found it either? I haven't either. Oh, let's talk about how we haven't found it, but in very insidious ways. Which is why when you go, if you view a masters in Eastern religion, and say you go try to be a monk, at the path of the monk, the process of becoming spiritually enlightened, is something like the master being pretty mean to you from an objective viewpoint, as objective as you can be, right? That anybody that was put in that position would view them being as kind of harsh. But the reason, the purpose of it, or coy in a way, right? Like trickster-like. The whole purpose is the master can never tell you what your secret is, what your true purpose is, what you are. You can't explain it to people. And you can define the process through which others have come to that kind of enlightenment, that kind of realization. But you can't do it for other people, which is what people look for. They look for quick solutions. So the only way to break people out of that habit is to hold them in the incredibly painful place they don't want to stay. Go meditate. Not for an hour. Do it for a couple days. Go fast. Not for 6 hours. Do it for a week. Go isolate yourself. Not for a week. Do it for a couple years. You see what I'm saying? Eliminate the external problems, the things that distract you. Go within. It's the only way to truth, and nobody else can define it for you. But we've done a pretty good job throughout history of distilling what the process looks like. We haven't brought it all together yet. I think that's what's necessary, and that's what I'm trying to do. Let's bring it all together into something that's digestible by every human being, that isn't defined by where you live on a map, on an arbitrary line that's been drawn on a piece of paper by somebody that's come before you. That doesn't define you in any way. Just like the color of your skin doesn't define you in any way. Your sex doesn't define you in any way. Nothing external. No external quality defines who you are. No physical quality defines who you are. There is something true about that. There's also something that's been perverted in that idea, in the United States at least right now, politically, which is disturbing. Because the product of it is something like looking again to the external world for the solutions to those problems, which you're never going to find. A passing on of suffering. The sort of imbalance that has grown, a misunderstanding of what the human being is, which then misplaces the role of the human being within nature itself. When the human being doesn't act as the thing that defines maps, individual maps, I'm not saying maps for other people, but the thing, I mean, maybe in some kind of distilled form, but like no one human being is enough to actually do that by themselves. Which is why it's taken millennia for us to get to a place where we kind of understand this process in any form, or how it relates to other visions of it. No one human being is enough. That the way that we proceed and go up in this world, the way that that whole world develops, is something like each individual person expressing that individuality, that truth, which is also where beauty comes from. It's also why you're attracted to it. It's also why one person can do something completely and utterly novel, and you'll find millions of people trying to do the exact same thing and copy them. Take the cranberry juice dude, right? The vibing guy on the longboard. You can feel the energy from that man. Very individual, very unique. I mean, you're sitting there listening to Fleetwood Mac, riding in the middle of the street on a longboard, drinking ocean spray cranberry juice and vibing. There was not one other person on the world, face of the planet, doing that when he did that. After he did that, look at how many people tried to copy it. I find it hilarious. Literally all of social media just blowing up with people trying to do their own take, all hiding as if they aren't trying to have the exact same kind of effect. But in kidding themselves, because they're looking externally for answers. They're not expressing their individuality. They're copying somebody else's. And expecting the same result? No. It really is funny. But like I said, in having those other individuals, some of our listeners, some of this community that we've created, and seeing people applying this process and the beauty that's coming from it, I haven't asked him yet if he wants me to actually mention his name or anything that he's doing right now. I will communicate with him this week. But one of these individuals has, like I said, created a project for himself. He's created music. And he reached out to me So I will check with him, and if he does, I definitely want to help spread his message as well. I think we can all do that for each other, but also I need to have his permission to do that first. So I'll do that this week, right? But that in him reaching out and expressing, hey, I'm trying to apply what you've been talking about, and it's been working for me in some aspect, and then showing that to me, and not only to me, to the other world, and me going, when I went and looked through what he's been working on, I was stunned. He produces hip-hop beats. He produces beats. And you could, as soon as I started listening, you could just hear the talent pouring out of it. It's such a fucking beautiful thing. It makes me emotional. That everybody has this inside of them. But it's not the same thing. You can't copy it. You have to express what you truly are. And then he gets it. If you're listening, brother, you get it. Keep doing what you're doing. And each one of you that is listening to this can do the exact same thing. Doesn't mean you all have to come to me and show me what it is. I hope you do. I hope you feel comfortable to do that. Because like I said, I think we can all help each other out. Help each other give the confidence. We can create that community I was talking about to support each other in this process. Because it is incredibly difficult and it takes an immense amount of courage. It's so scary and it's a very long process. It does not happen overnight. It only happens when you are ready to view yourself radically honestly, in a radically honest way. All of the flaws. To embrace all of those flaws, everything that's happened to you and everything you've done to other people. Embracing those things and distilling those things, allowing yourself to release that energy, the negativity that comes along with it, to take that negative energy and turn it into a positive, to realize that the reason that you are here is because you are strong. That you haven't only done it in this life, you have done this so many times, in so many different forms, that you really are this close from what we could define as a finish line. That you're about to move on to the next level of existence. And it's completely up to you, whether you want to stay in this embodiment or you want to move on to the next. The only way to do that is to suffer. To choose that suffering. To learn how to be the thing that takes something negative and turns it into a positive. Turns it into beauty. Because as I've said before, we all suffer. It's incredible if you focus on the suffering, how much diversity there is within it. In how many ways people suffer individually. How overwhelming it is for each individual. But also how that kind of defines you as something that is as unique as your handprint. It defines what your hurdles are. It actually, in a way, can act as a compass that you can follow. Now, as you blaze that path, that's what true leadership is. Blazing new paths, not following others. That's why I said many episodes ago that I believe true leadership is something exceedingly rare. It's not a position. It's not a certain set of characteristics that you embody. No. Leadership is vision. It's faith. It's acting on your truth regardless of what the external circumstances or consequences are. And that process is exceedingly scary, but once you start practicing it, you cease to be afraid of it. Once you start realizing the benefit of it, the expansion that it creates within yourself, oh man, you look for it instead of run from it. You look for it. Instead of the dragon chasing you, you go chase dragons. Does that make sense? You become a dragon slayer. And honestly, the dragons tremble when they see you. Thank you so much for your support. Let's continue to support each other. Let's continue to do that work. To know that you're not alone in this process. Even if you are physically alone, you don't have anybody around you right now. I know how hard that is. I've been in that position for a very long time. It's honestly one of the most uncomfortable experiences I think a human being can go through. If you are there, if you feel alone, or if you actually are alone, know that there's no better place to do this work than where you're at. You're always where you're supposed to be. Always. That if you find yourself in a bad place, if you find yourself in a negative situation, you are there because of things you've done before. But it's not to punish you. It's for you to respond properly. That hurdle is there for you to find the way to actually jump over it. To overcome it. And then if you don't do that, it's not like you're gonna go to hell. I don't believe that. Or you're gonna be punished by some external deity. No. You're gonna repeat that same hurdle. Because it's for your development. That's what life is. So you can choose to run away from that hurdle. You can choose to try to go around it. You can choose to try to find shortcuts. All of that stuff doesn't matter. There's going to be the exact same hurdle in front of you, whichever path you choose. The only way to get over it and to move on to the next hurdle is to find a way to actually overcome it, to stare it down, to do the work that entails. It's the only way. There is no payoff without the suffering, the sacrifice. And that's a fundamental truth. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. As I said, if you're looking for something like proof, the best thing I can give you is watch your empathy and watch the feeling of nostalgia within yourself, especially when you're viewing time frames that have come before. I think it can prove to you anecdotally that this is a truth. It has for me. I can't say that for certain. I can't say it's objectively true. I can't give you a defined way to fix yourself, short of this process. Maybe I can. That's what this process is. But I can't tell you how to do it within yourself. I can't tell you the specifics of how it's going to work, if that makes sense. I can't tell you who you are. I don't know who you are. I know who I am. It's the only thing I know. And if you have enjoyed these episodes, guys, if you enjoyed these ideas, please like, share, and subscribe. As I said, on the Facebook page, the Instagram page, the YouTube page will be up very soon. And if you feel like you want to support this work in any way, if you want to see this message expand, please consider supporting in Patreon. If you can donate, whatever you can donate, I appreciate it. It does help me out immensely. And I do think that this thing's going to continue to grow. So I appreciate whatever form of support you've given me, even if that is simply just listening. Keep doing the work, folks. Lots of love. Until next time, bye-bye.